UK's traditional industries had become inefficient, often nationalised and torn apart by strikes. In 1979, a leader came to power who, like Dung, challenged and destroyed powerful vested interests.
Very excited, very aware of the responsibilities.
In the most basic terms, Thatcher's vision was to let the market free. She believed the state had become far too dominant and that we should take the shackles of industry, take the shackles of finance, cut taxes, deregulate, and let private business, the private sector, drive the economy forward.
The best way to think about Mrs. Thatcher is that she was a classic Conservative. Classic Tory constituencies were looked after by her, and classic Tory enemies were taken on.
Nowhere was economic change felt more keenly than in Longbridge, home to the mass-market car maker British Leyland. On a vast, sprawling industrial site, by the 70s this motoring giant was in seemingly perpetual crisis.
We are invincible!
The Chinese company NBC's UK marketing manager, James Hunter Johnston, started work in 1979, the year that Mrs. Thatcher came to power.
Industrial disputes were almost a monthly activity. At least every year there'd be some sort of industrial disruption around about the time when wage rates were being renegotiated. We actually had a lockout. So the workforce actually occupied the factory, the management was locked out for at least 2 or 3 weeks, and production, of course, just stopped completely when that was going on. It's been an extremely bumpy career to have over these last 30 years in manufacturing industry. I've almost given up counting the number of times I have changed jobs, but it must be 10 or 15 times now.
NBC's premises in the UK reflect the changing of the guard. Its warehouse is perched on a hill, overlooking the desolate former home of the motor manufacturer where Trevor Foster once worked.
I've done numerous jobs over the years, mostly in the car industry. My last job before this one, I ended up at Continental. We made petrol pumps for a lot of the big car companies, Land Rover, Jaguar, Volvo, etc. Unfortunately, they had to ship the business off to the Czech Republic because it was proving to be too expensive to produce parts in this country. So they all got shipped off to the Czech Republic and we all got made redundant.
In Britain and in the US, manufacturing employment slumped in the 1980s. Under Margaret Thatcher and under US President Ronald Reagan, a different kind of global economics was taking root, which would eventually lead to the great unravelling we're now experiencing.
The fundamental problem in both the United States and the UK was that beginning with Thatcher and Reagan, there was this ideology that markets were efficient and self-regulating.
How are you?
They thought that the private sector could do no wrong, and that we didn't need to have regulation, and we could cut tax rates, and the economy would produce a lot more revenue. A lot of this was just hogwash and ideology.
In 1986, Margaret Thatcher's love of free markets unleashed a financial revolution called Big Bang. It spurred the creation of the modern banking system, which in 2007-8 came close to bankrupting itself and us. 25 years on from Big Bang, there's still some nostalgia for the regimented order of the London Stock Exchange's trading floor, gone along with tight restrictions on what firms could do.
Although it was very sad, you had this amazing club for the last, God knows how many years. It's coming to an end. It was going to throw up a great new opportunity, which actually turned out to be very, very successful.
Big Bang allowed big international banks to buy up stockbroking firms. High street retail banking was combined with more risky investment banking, and vast financial conglomerates were created.
Immense money was flowing around at the time. Everything became magnified by a huge amount because of the amount of money that came rolling in, and salaries were going up. Certain people were in great demand and paid huge salaries. Basically everyone was earning more whatever you were doing. It was sort of champagne times, and things were very exciting across the board.
The culture of British finance changed in a fundamental way.
Banking should be boring. I was in banking some 25 years ago. It was a pretty boring business. And then, of course, we have things like Big Bang in the UK, where basically banking combined with trading activities, with merchant banking, hedge funds, and so on. And so now your bank is just as likely to be spending quite a lot of its time and maybe even more of its money on Delta One trading. And if you can define what Delta One trading is, you're probably doing better than the chief executive of a number of the banks.
With the arrival of impenetrable complex financial concepts such as Delta One trading, London became the world's leading international financial centre.
Totally took away the character of the city. All of a sudden we're all sitting behind television screens and talking on telephones, and very soon one doesn't know who one's talking to at the end of that telephone. I'm sure it has been very good for the city, yeah. I mean, it's been marvellous for the city. I mean, the numbers that are around now, the amount of trade that takes place on a daily basis is absolutely colossal.
The rise of financial services in the 1980s and 90s as manufacturing shrank seemed to be the answer for a country struggling to compete in the world. But it was to create an economy that now seems unbalanced and unable to grow. While Britain was embarking on its financial revolution, in America, the emperor of all free marketeers was ascending his throne to become the world's most powerful central banker. Alan Greenspan was appointed by Ronald Reagan to be chairman of the US Federal Reserve.
Greenspan was somebody who believed very passionately in the primacy and efficacy and morality of free markets. This wasn't just a technician, a man who understood central banking. This was a man with an ideological commitment, and that ideological commitment had consequences.
One consequence of the triumph of the free market was an astonishing surge in the pay of those at the top. Banks and financial firms took bigger and more dangerous risks to generate bigger profits and huge pay packets. And when the bosses of our mainstream companies saw the spectacular rewards that were going to bankers, hedge fund managers, private equity partners, they too demanded and got absolutely enormous pay rises. The gap between the very richest and the very poorest widened at a pace we hadn't seen since the Victorian era.
When you look at the multiples of executive pay to the median or middle of the workforce, they're broadly stable throughout the 20th century until you get to the mid-1980s, and then you get the takeoff. The multiple of top pay to the middle was about 25 to 1. Today, it's over 150 to 1. It's gone up 6 times in just over 25 years.
That's a breakdown of basic morality. These CEOs don't deserve these compensations. Typically, the highest paid ones lose the most money for their companies. So it's really corporate theft, pure and simple.
Overwhelmingly, the benefits went to the top people, the most sophisticated people, the managers, the people who were plugged into the benefits of the global economy, whose companies were making very high profits.
But what about the rest of us? How did we do?
Real wage growth in terms of take-home pay of the typical American worker has been 0 since the mid-60s.
As Britain deindustrialized over the same period, you had the services sector expand, and high-end skills were better rewarded and valued. So that meant that, of course, if you were not a high-skilled worker, your income would have fallen because the work that you previously did would have been done by developing countries who could do it more cheaply.
What was happening was incomes were going down, people would have been very unhappy if their standard of living went down as their incomes went down or stagnated. So, in effect, we came up with a solution. We said, consume as if your income is going up. Well, now, how do you consume as if your income is going up when your income is going down? Only one way. Yeah.
Are you sure you've got everything, honey?
Let me see. Wine, camembert.
The financial revolution spawned a debt revolution. In the new deregulated world, everyone could have a loan, a credit card.
I'm ever so glad you have a long access.
That's what friends are for.
And everyone...
Our incomes may have been rising relatively slowly, but we could boost our living standards by borrowing to buy. Debt changed from a risk to a must.
Suddenly you had a society in which the ruling elite increasingly were obsessed with money, and that fed down through the media in all sorts of ways.
You're not in Macclesfield now, Bob.
It became the case that we were absolutely obsessed with the pursuit of money, possessions, appearances, fame. Crucially, if the people at the top are offering that as a model, the people at the bottom are going to be influenced by it.
It's a party card, Nathan.
Yeah. Our values have completely changed. We wanted more, we wanted better. In all sorts of ways, we've encouraged to spend, 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 and we borrowed, borrowed, borrowed.
This is part of the house that was actually added, I think, in Victorian times. So this is maybe about 100, 110 years old. But really, this is why we bought it, because we just wanted somewhere to bring up the children, which gave them more space, somewhere to play in the garden.
James Hunter Johnston bought his dream house in the early 1990s.
In those days, it wasn't difficult to borrow money to buy property. I think everyone was confident that property values would go on rising, so taking on a big mortgage, which we did in order to buy this, didn't seem to be to us to be a great risk. I think we were just generally confident that salaries would continue to creep upwards, that it'd give us the money that was necessary to either make the improvements or to, in due course of time, pay off the mortgage.
I think people felt themselves getting richer because their houses were becoming more and more valuable, and that gave them the sense of confidence to borrow.